Am I audible well?
So this is a weekly group, or
Say that again, Lunav.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
yes?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We have two events every week, or we try to have two events every week. Um, the first event is where we try to practice writing, or even if it's staring at a blank page and not doing anything, we just get together and do that. The Thursday events are when I was telling KB that we think about writing, uh, create conversations around writing, um, have different perspectives on it. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the
Yay,
panel.
Sarah!
Yes.
Hi, sorry I was late. I couldn't get anything to work, and my internet is spotty because I'm up in the mountains, so sorry if I suddenly disappear or anything.
That's completely fine.
We'll forgive you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We can wait for maybe a minute late. People here have a tendency to show up a little late, so we can wait maybe a minute and then start.
Ah, it's always the way, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yes. I think it's great what you're doing with meeting. I mean, I think that whole generative space is really important, and sometimes it's too easy as individuals that we can just push it away or shut it, but we're making a commitment not only to a weekly time, but to other people in the group.
Mm.
So that's great.
Well, and when I first started writing with more of a focus on creative writing, I had an executive corporate position that was really demanding of my time. And I was in a small writing group and whining about not having the time. And a friend of mine who was also in the group told me to shut up and get up 15 minutes earlier in the morning and tie myself to my desk chair with my bathroom belt and just start with 15 minutes. In essence, I did that, and the 15 minutes ultimately grew into hours and hours every day. But she gave me permission, essentially, to make the time to write. And sometimes that's really all you need. Put it on your calendar, even if it is just 15 minutes,
Yeah.
or, if you're committed to writing, it will go.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, that story actually comes up fairly frequently when we see each other. It's Mary saying,
Mary says she attends a live stream weekly where they write together.
oh, cool. Yeah, and she and I do read and critique together.
You do what together?
Read and critique. We read our
Huh.
works and critique each other's writing.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah and I were in an MFA program together where we got together twice a year for 3 days and obsessed on writing craft and did other things that we shouldn't have been doing, maybe. But we were students.
Right. An important part of the student experience.
Absolutely.
That's
Definitely.
true. Very true. I didn't do a lot of writing during the quarter. Were we on the quarter system or the semester system? Whatever we were on,
It was quarter.
it was quarter. I did I did most of the writing when we were off,
Mm.
and so that I could just hand in pages and then work on rewrites when the professor would give us back the pages, because I don't do well under pressure. So I have a tendency to just go to sleep if someone's pressuring me.
That's one tactic.
Lonoff,
Sorry.
is there an MFA program or equivalent at your university?
No,
MFA
we
in writing?
don't. I think the university spaces in India, in general, do not have an MFA in creative writing. Maybe some university
Uh-huh.
might, but it's not. It's not. Usually, writers go abroad to Iowa or somewhere else to pursue MFAs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of our MFA programs, although they're connected with universities, are low residency program. So people come to at least in the case of the program I attended, 10-day residencies out of the year, and then they work remotely.
Hmm.
Although there are certainly some that are in person.
Hmm.
It's really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, we can, I think we can start. People will eventually join. Um,
Okay.
so, yeah, thank you so much for uh, wanting to participate in this panel. Um, yeah, so I'll just briefly do the introductions for everyone here. Um, we have Kit Bacon Gressit, or KB. She is a lecturer at the California State University, where she teaches women's gender and sexuality studies. She's a writer. Her work is published in Heartcrackers, Evening Street Review, Not My President, The Anthology of Dissent, Ducks Magazine, Publishers Weekly, The Missing Slate, Trivia, Miss Magazine, Gay San Diego, and County Times. As she mentioned, she has an MFA in creative writing from the University of California, and she is a publisher and founding editor of Writers Resist. Um, then we have Debbie Hall, who is a writer, photographer, and also a psychologist at San Diego's Naval Medical Center. She did her MFA at Pacific University in Forest Grove. She is the author of two poetry collections, In the Jaguar's House and What Light I Have. Her works have also appeared in San Diego Poetry Annual, Serving House Journal, Sixfold, Poets Reading the News, Poetry 24, Bird's Thumb, Califragile, Gyroscope Review, and Hawaii Pacific Review, NPR, USD Magazine, and also the San Diego Union Tribune. She's also a finalist in the 2019 San Diego Book Awards and an award-winning chapbook, Falling into the River. She is also a editor at Writers Resist. Sara Marchant is a writer. I hope I got the pronunciation right.
Mhm.
She has also done an MFA in creative writing and writing for the performing arts from the University of California. Her work is available in the Manifestation, Every Writer's Resource, Full Grown People, Brilliant Flash Fiction, the Coachella Review, Writers Resist, and East Jasmine Review. Her nonfiction was included in the Women of Color anthology, All the Women in My Family Sing. Her novellas include Let Me Go and The Drive Away Has Two Sides. She is the author of a memoir called Proof of Loss, and her new novel, Becoming Delilah, is out. I will put a link to their profiles in the chat, so um, you guys can check them out and their work. They're very wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah, welcome to this panel. And oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Lonav. I am a student at FLU, Hyderabad. I am I write, and I have had the privilege of working with Writers Resist as a social media manager. And my blog is called Stories Under My Bed. So, yeah, that's about me. Um, yeah, so we'll start. Thank you again for joining this panel. We are all very excited to have you. People who might have missed, there are rains going on and there are other events, so whoever has missed it will probably check out the YouTube recording. Yeah, so this panel is titled Writing in Resistance, Resistance in Writing. It is subtitled. The reason we subtitled it as a motion or notion of resistance is because resistance, if we look at the root of the word, it comes from resistere, which translates to a cause to stand. So, standing it's a movement that this resistance is a movement that occurs as you stand for yourself and for others, and it's always a conscious effort, right? It's a choice. We don't have to, but of course, a lot of people don't have the choice. But usually, we have a choice to stand, and we stand according to our context, in the context of caste, which is very prevalent here, class, gender, sexuality, and fascism. So, and also in our very personal lives, in the relationships we build and sustain. So resistance can be seen as a motion that is towards um, um, firmness and away from disintegrating. So and it's also a spatial activity, because when you stand, you occupy space, right? So it's a exercise in dignity. So I think a good way to start this panel would be to ask you, why did you start Writers Resist, and what led you to visualize a space like that for people who are unaware of it, so that we understand what kind of why did you want to create a space where such kind of motion is was made possible. So yeah.
Well, we do have our origin story, and it's all Sarah's fault. We were in the MFA program together. I think it was 2015 we graduated.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, November, whatever the first Tuesday was in November, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, much to the surprise and for some of us horror that he made it. I got a text or an email or something from somebody I did not recognize saying, "What do we do now? What do we do now?" I'm like, "Who are you?"
She literally didn't remember me.
Really don't. I have to say, my mother died at the beginning of our program. So rather than socializing a whole lot, I spent most of our time during the 10-day residencies hiding in my hotel room writing, which was
not only that, but I didn't realize that this really deep, meaningful conversation we had, our one deep, meaningful conversation, was in a bar the night that she had just found out her mother was dying or had died, and she was so drunk she didn't realize that she was even meeting me. And so I thought we had like this really deep, meaningful conversation about like life and mortality and mothers, and she had no idea who I was. So
I didn't, but she did bring me up to speed. And my immediate reaction, having come out of a 2-year MFA program, was, well, we are writers, and writing is a fabulous form of resistance. So let's publish writing that is resistance writing. So you called me, I think contacted me within a week of the election.
it was the next day, wasn't it?
Was it the next day? Yeah,
it was the next day, because by Friday, wasn't it like within a week we had a magazine?
Well, it took a little more time to get the website up, but we formally launched the 1st of December. We contacted all of our writerly friends and asked them to send us examples of their resistance writing, and we put the first issue out the beginning of December. So it took maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but we were highly motivated, and we were standing up, and we were taking up space to get the message out that what was happening in our country was absolutely unacceptable. But that's how we got started. It was clearly a reaction to a political trend that those of us involved found horribly dismaying. So as founding editors, Sarah and I spent maybe the first year really doing a lot of outreach to make people aware of the publication, asking them to submit. We got a little bit of funding so that we could pay the pittance that we still pay for people's submissions. And it's grown from there. We stumbled upon people like Debbie Hall, who are equally invested in this concept of challenging inequity and questionable politics. Debbie, you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I've always been somebody that's been very concerned and interested in social justice issues. That was a driving interest in my first year of my MFA program, but certainly learned about a lot about how best to do that in the context of writing poetry. How, for example, it's different than just an opinion piece or rhetoric or making a case where you know what you want to say from the outset. With poetry, it's so important to, number one, be open to a path of discovery that you don't, if you already know how the poem's going to end, then there's no discovery in the poem. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of writing, that people often write poetry to make sense of the world. And, you know, I think that's so true with resistance writing when it's as crazy as it is right now and was in 2016 when you two started the journal. There's even more of a reason for it now. So I think that's always been a strong interest for me and so important to take up space and give people a voice, which is what Writers Resist and other journals do.
Yeah, a lot of times it feels more like group therapy.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's a really often poignant, sometimes very challenging experience to read all of the submissions.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
People are hurting, people are angry, people are scared around the globe because of the many political dynamics going on right now. Obviously, the fight for equity and social justice has been going on for literally millennia, not here in the US, but around the globe. And we're just one of however many outlets for expressing those concerns, along with hope. We do get pieces that are quite hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is a really important outlet that is not always the focal point for creative writing. Often creative writing is a form of escape, entertainment, all of which is great, but the focus on resistance writing is a bit unusual in the realm of literary journals. So it's nice to be able to contribute to the outlets of that ilk that exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what uh, you guys are doing is incredibly important because, like you said, I think the history of writing has also been a history of gatekeeping in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm.
to sort of reclaim that activity and to move beyond when the writing comes from the margins, and I think there's a lot of rage, and to go through those submissions and to I think that's a very brave and very laborious task that you guys engage in. Um, I can think of um, uh, yeah. So when I think of resistant writing, I think of, at least in the Indian context. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but um, B.R. Ambedkar was probably the first person to write so rigorously and so relentlessly on caste while residing in caste. There were others also, but there's something that the rigor of this man that is very inspiring, because he kept writing periodicals. Kept writing even though it was difficult to sustain them. Um, uh, Most of them shut down, but he kept doing it. So I think this insistence on writing is very very special. I remember when we first talked, KB. You mentioned how after Trump lost the elections, and Writers Resist almost came to a end, but the work you're doing was so important that you continued the project. And yeah. So I I want to ask. So after years of, I mean, you have kind of already answered it, but I want to understand each of your individual experience. After years of reading submissions in Writers Resist, and what did this activity reveal to you about the world? Um, something that maybe prior to setting this journal up, that you didn't experience, right? Did you have any revelations about the relationship between resistance and writing, or you would get a lot of submissions from outside the US also? So, what was that experience like? What did that reveal about writing?
Sarah, Debbie, either of you want to jump in on that one?
I didn't realize that poets are insane. But yeah, that was my chief take. I was like, oh, these people are a little scary. So poets, man, they scare me. I don't read the poetry submissions anymore. They used to send them to me before we had Debbie, and I think before Renee. And they would say, oh, we can't decide. What do you think of this? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you scare me. And so they stopped sending poetry to me because I don't know what they're talking about, and they scare me. And also, there's a whole lot of rage. Like, I think if we could do something with that rage, like collect it in a ball, it would, create a supernova or something, because people are just so angry and they don't have anywhere to put it except in their writing sometimes.
Yeah, that makes it more acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I noticed, and I knew this intellectually, I got it because of what I teach. I knew that there is a tremendous amount of common human experiences around the globe. It's kind of common sense. But reading, very personal works by people who are experiencing those commonalities really drove home for me that we share a lot around the globe, a tremendous amount, actually. Human beings are not that different, and that's something that we teach in our field of study anyway. Socially constructed categories of difference attempt to separate us, to support, hegemonic ideologies to perpetuate that. But we have so much more in common than we have in terms of differences. And that's been a real joy to see. And it's a good reminder. Again, I got it intellectually from all the theory I have to teach, but seeing the intimacy of it really drives it home. It's been a real joy. I appreciate your recognizing that it's some work, but it's much more of a joy than it is work, even though sometimes it makes me cry. So.
Yeah, I would echo what KB has said about, just the universality of so many of the issues and around the world. And it's exciting to me to read work from afar. I mean, that's probably one of the best parts of all of this endeavor. And just how critically important it is for people to have a voice. I mean, just having a voice in and of itself, particularly in countries with far fewer freedoms than ours. There's such a need for that, and that may be small, but act of resistance is critically important to survival in some of these countries. So
yeah, Lona said we tried to stop after Trump lost the election, but it was January 6th. Like, we were sitting there watching that happen, and we were texting each other, and I told KB, I said, we have to open up submissions. We have to, because what are the poets going to do? I mean, those poets need an outlet. And so even though I think they're all scary and I'm, freaked out by them, I was looking out for you, poets.
You're awesome.
Thank you.
Now, are all of your folks poets, or do you also have authors of prose in your group?
We have all kinds of people.
Yeah.
We have, yes. We were not like a very set group. We host events and people come and attend them according to what they like. So, but yeah, it's very. I agree. It's very cool of you, Sara, to want to continue to give poets a voice. And I agree completely with Debbie how so many of these like countries in general need a outlet, need a voice, and they suffer. I have this quote of Lebanese writer Hoda Barakat, who said that we write, by we she was referring to Arab women, I write in wars and civil wars because I have no power, no strength, no weapons, and no soldiers. I write because
Mhm.
I crouch in the cellar like a rat, but I also write as the rat that gnaws at the foundation and pillars. I betray the
Mm.
establishment and give evidence against it. So it's I think spaces, and I think that's what writing does to for people who um, do not occupy a certain space in society, the space that is occupied by the dominant class and caste. So yeah, very wonderful to hear. Um, there's something else I wanted to also ask your experience of, to see how it is like in the US also. Um, and I think I mentioned this briefly in the mail of how the syntax of political action in the language with which we tend to call for mobilization, I personally feel that it sort of undermines the space that creativity offers to a protest, and also in the imagination of how the space could look like. Um, for example, in at least in Indian universities, public universities, um, student political parties tend to have discussions and reading circles around political issues, but these are also very polarizing circles where there's very little dialogue between these, and like the discourse, like one of you mentioned, is like very set, like whereas in a poem you don't know what you will discover, right? So I feel that the politics, student politics, at least in India, do not have or is losing a vocabulary for creativity because um, it doesn't seem to them that it might make a contribution to the larger struggle. So my question would be to, like, in your experience of American political climate, especially with the recent student movements, and in your own writing also, do you find that resistance writing is always loud, like very set in its imagination of what it should be, or is there a possibility, or have you experienced a possibility of a quieter act of writing and resistance that the larger political uh, climate does not pay attention to? Is that a very long question?
I think we got it.
Okay.
Yeah. I just was reading an email from the chancellor of our public university system that listed forbidden behaviors that represented everything that has been happening on university campuses relative to Israel's war against Gaza. It was pretty dismaying, and the language was very bureaucratic, very negative language about these different activities, such as protesting. So I would say certainly part of our society, there is a rigid approach, a growing rigid approach, since several of the protest movements in response to police violence against civilians, murderous police violence against civilians, a number of states in the US have passed legislation making it much more difficult to protest. So there is a backlash, and there's common language around that. As far as creative writing, I think there are responses to these various backlashes and the very bureaucratic approach to attempting to limit resistance. One of the joys of creative writing is you can get beyond that, the rat gnawing at the foundations. I love that quote. Thanks for sharing that. That was really powerful. But we still, I mean, we were talking about this really before we got started. We have a lot of freedoms that are documented in our founding documents for this country, but they are ideals, and we are not there, and we will not be there in my lifetime. But those of us who write resistance writing or protest in other ways or publish it or run for office to try to challenge the entrenched patriarchy. We're all being creative in one way or another, whether it's in writing or in physical action, or sometimes the two are combined. But we are challenging that language that is so repressive. Writing, of course, is a really effective way to do that if you choose to be bold. It can be scary to be bold with your writing. It takes some courage to practice any kind of resistance, even in the United States these days, because the backlash can come from, you know, the extremist on the other side of your political issue, or from your state government, or potentially from the federal government now, and indeed from our Supreme Court. Resistance is essential, and writers in the United States have been stating that in one way or another since the foundation. Well, since our rebellion against the British monarchy, as the country was being founded. So, yeah, I know all that repressive stuff is out there, and I don't really care, because if we don't challenge it, it wins. And again, challenging can be scary, but if we don't do it, repression wins.
Well, now, if you were asking about the idea of quieter writing, that is not so loud. And I think, you know, the problem with bureaucratic language and that sort of thing is that it's so dehumanizing. And part of what writing does, particularly reading writing from people different than yourself, whether it's from other countries or whatever, is that it can build insight and empathy. And sometimes it's that quieter writing that does that we feel more connected to. We might not feel repelled by like a line of bureaucratic gobbledygook or something that is pushing away. And I think that's so critically important with overcoming some of the inequities in the world and power imbalances that we talk about all the time. So yeah, that quieter stuff is important too.
Wasn't there some recent study that said that people who read fiction, particularly novels, have more empathy towards others in the first place?
Yeah.
So just on that basic of level.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the fiction writers themselves, like yourself, really have more empathy.
Yeah. Single-handedly destroying the narcissist here. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, we do publish prose. We publish narrative nonfiction.
We just don't get as much. We just don't get as much. There's not as many submissions from. Sometimes I go like to my socials and I like beg people to send us more prose because we'll get, I don't know how many poetry submissions every day, but prose is like farther away for some reason.
I think it's the word count. Our token of love in the form of $10 honoraria per piece accepted is a little sparse for people writing longer prose, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Although we have a lot of people whose work is accepted and they refuse the honorarium because they're able to, number one. But we don't charge for subscribing, so I think it's their contribution to receiving the journal. So it's interesting that we have to balance the business side of resistance with actually publishing resistance. It's kind of an interesting place to be. But resistance can be costly in a lot of ways, not just financially, as many people know. We just had an issue it was a special issue called Amplified Voices. One of our former editors came to us wanting to do this and knew that we'd say yes. So we solicited submissions from people who were either living in conflict zones or had escaped conflict zones. And it was a really powerful issue. We were really grateful that she did it with us. That was a pretty tough series of submissions to read, but they were fabulous. And some of them in reading you might have thought of as very quiet approach to resistance, but their innate power made them very loud.
I'll leave the link for the submission guidelines for uh, people in Hyderabad or in India to submit. It's a wonderful space. I think I hope you receive more prose. I think for me personally also it's less. I think word count, yes, but more than that, I think it's somehow easier for me to express something, the effects of fascism or the effects of oppression, um, in poetry rather than prose, because I think like most of the times I do not really understand what exactly living in such a environment is doing to me. And to
Mm.
write prose, I feel like I need to have that sort of clarity before I can tell the world something about my experience. So it's a longer process, and I think it just takes a long time to produce something like that. While for poetry, it's
Mm.
much easier to share that experience. At least personally, I'm not sure if that's the case with why there's less prose submissions. Um, yeah, I think we can open up to the audience for any questions. If they would like to ask any questions, so you can raise your hand or you can leave it in the um, chat box also.
Oh, I just figured I've never used Google Meeting, and I just found the chat box. A little slow on the uptake.
I don't know where it is either.
It's like a little quote box. But my writerly colleague Mary mentioned something I'll share with you in a little bit more detail. An example of backlash against resistance writing. I for maybe 15 years hosted an author series at our local public library, which is part of the entire San Diego County library system. And after Trump was elected, another writer I knew put together a anthology based on an anthology of resistance writing, particularly targeting Donald Trump. And I put it on the agenda. A number of the people who were published were local, so I put it on the agenda for one of our months and invited the local authors. I happened to have a piece in it too. And the library tried to ban that anthology. The public library tried to ban that anthology from our author series. Yeah, it blew me away because the American Library Association is one of the greatest proponents in our country for free speech and the freedom to read. And it took me months, and ultimately I had to call on a legal freedom of speech organization to challenge the library to back off from attempting to prohibit use of the book. So even in our public library system, again, an entity that is typically pro freedom to read, pro free speech, has suffered the repercussions of a more repressive government. They didn't want to create a problem in the community because of disagreement with the book. That was the argument they shared with me, that they were afraid it would be disruptive to the community. The election itself was disruptive, hence all of the response to in the form of resistance writing as well as other forms. But it was a challenging few months. It really, it still makes me sad that a public library would do that. But yeah. Did you see any questions? Sorry for distracting from your process.
Did after the library, like usually that happens in India all the time. We have, whenever there's a documentary film or a book that is critical of the ruling government we have, it gets banned. And but I think that also creates a like a hype for it, so people, I think it gets more popular in that way. So that's one, I think that's one effect of banning resistant writing also. I think we have a question from Mary, she asks comments from Debbie on writing as therapy.
Writing as therapist?
As therapy, yes.
Hmm. Well, I think it can have that function for the creator, certainly. As I was saying earlier, that um, one important part of writing poetry in particular, is the idea of discovery and trying to make sense of the world. So it can be certainly therapeutic in that sense. And some therapists use writing as a form of therapy. So I'm not sure I'm getting quite at what the question was asking, but I think there's no doubt um, about that. Yeah.
I think therapy is therapy, but if you just write things down, like I write letters to people when I'm angry at them. I write these really, like, yeah. My brother's like, these letters are so mean because he's the only one I ever send them to. Otherwise, I just destroy them. But if you just write down in the letter why you're so angry with that person and then don't send it, that's the important part. If you want to maintain a relationship with them, I send it to my brother because he can't help it. He has to be in a relationship with me. He can't get away. But yeah, otherwise, there was another question I read down here
Yeah,
quickly.
I'll read it out. It's from Shreya from FLU. What would you say the average attitude towards differences among the submissions you get? As in, is it mostly rage or defense or the longing for connection, etc.? Yeah.
I think it's across the board. What about you all, Sarah and Debbie? We get such diverse writing. I think there are pieces that are clearly calling for more connection, more understanding, more empathy, and other pieces where appropriately people just need to rage. There's a lot to rage about around the globe. So,
Yeah.
Debbie and Sarah, what's your experience with our submissions?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, some of the submissions are clearly a litany of complaints. And again, kind of more on the rhetoric or opinion piece side of things, which people need to be able to do. I mean, to have a voice in that sense. But I do think the yearning for connection is clearly there.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we're going to overcome any of this, you need that. You need that connection. You need that sense of community. And one of the things that comes up for me a lot when I'm thinking about resistance writing is it acts against erasure. You know, when we think about oppressed communities and individuals, that's a danger. And so every act of writing or other creative arts, music, other kinds of things, are acts of resistance against being erased. And one more thing about just the yearning for connection. I think when we have our early readings, that's a sense I get from that, how important that is.
Yeah.
Even if we have a smallish turnout. I mean, just it's so important for people to connect and be there.
Well, and that's just to follow up on what Debbie just said. I think your creative writing club is an example of our readings. We have a virtual reading with every issue that comes out, and writing is a mostly solo process, even though some of us participate in group writing exercises, but it's still ultimately a very solo process for most writers. So the ability to gather with other writers and just have a sense of community is really important. And for those virtual readings that we do, we start a little early. So the writers who are sharing their recently published works have the opportunity to talk to each other. And it's usually a really endearing conversation before the formal readings start. It's people need connection. I mean, we were chatting before this panel discussion began because people need connection. We were sharing stuff, we were asking each other questions, and writing has that very strange sort of duality where it's a solo process. And although many of us write for ourselves, we're also writing for an audience. We want our messages to be shared. So it's that balance between solo activity and seeking community around the words we want to share. And that the differences that may be implicit in our writing are are things that other people can relate to, those of us who understand the value of differences. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are scared by that, but I think writers who write in this realm are much more sensitive to the value of the differences among us and are more appreciative.
Mm-hmm.
What's that expression about the personal is universal?
Mm-hmm.
Personal is political.
Well, that too. But I mean, the more personal story you tell,
Yeah.
the more likely it is that it will relate to everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And I think my favorite kinds of writing is also that. I really enjoy the personal essay because it reveals so much about the world, but also about the person writing it. We do actually have like one of our only contests that we can afford to give out a prize is the personal essay contest that we host nationally.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is also because I think one of the best ways to talk about what's happening in the country and to yourself and the way you're experiencing the world is also the art of the personal essay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that's true, and that's something. Everything you said is also what we try to do at the club to have a community of writers to feel that even if you come together and you sit and you don't do anything, you know that there are other people who are just as struggling to get something done on the paper. And personally, I write to find other writers. I write about myself, but most of my efforts are to just so I can someday, like, just eventually find more and more writers and connect with them. So it's definitely there. Um, so no very grand reasons, but yeah, to find a sense of community. And it's not. I feel like at least in this country, I'm not sure what it is like in the States, but um, writing is an art form that is slowly like um, diminishing. Maybe because reading itself is not being done as much, or at least close reading. We're used to reading every like all the time, but not uh, actually sitting down with a piece and reading it with your entire body. So that is diminishing. So writing is also in some way diminishing. Any other questions on um, this? Yeah, Sai.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think my question might be catered more towards Debbie, but I we had this teacher at college. She was also offering counseling for students, and she'd always preach that therapy is very political and is very resistance oriented. And but our question would always be that, I mean, the dynamic between a client and a therapist is not one where you can assert your opinion towards them, right? Especially when they're coming to you talking about how they're oppressing another person in their life. So as a writer and a psychologist, right, um, is it frustrating to know that you have to be subversive sometimes in dealing with people that you must empathize with, or there might be some cases where you must take a strong, louder stance, but due to the nature of the dynamic, or your higher moral obligation as like a psychologist, you need to revert to a more subversive approach, right? How do you deal with frustrations like that?
That's a challenging question. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I don't see therapy as particularly political in that, in that space. There's certainly historically been a sense of the therapist as a blank slate, and the patient can, or the client can project safely anything they need to project onto that blank slate. So the therapist is not there to impose any particular viewpoint or outlook, whether it's political or otherwise. But can you say something again about what you were asking about frustration? Isn't it frustrating? Um, you said something about that.
I mean, I'm sure you must have had a lot of one-on-one conversations with people who, um, let's say you have like a very misogynistic client and they're asking you for help and problems with their marriage or something like that. And you
Hmm.
write, and as a writer or someone who's dealt with that sort of oppression before, it must be very hard to sort of fulfill your obligation as being that sort of blank slate for them, right? And once you step outside of the office, you view them differently. So
Sure.
I study English and psychology. So in one
Yeah.
class, it's like we have to discuss how you're not supposed to interject or object. Like there's like what this unwritten rule in therapy that the client is never quote unquote wrong. But then in English, when we're discussing caste and politics and Sappho and so many other things, we tend to be very vocal about these louder forms of resistance. So
Yes. Good to have that other outlet, right?
yeah,
Well, I
but
think, what occurs to me is that you have to find some other part of that person to connect to. Yeah, even if
mm,
they're misogynistic or they have some outlook that is repelling to you as an individual. As a
right,
therapist, the challenge is to find their humanness. And when we think about the broader issue of how to write in resistance, if we're trying to achieve more unity and less polarization, then we have to do that as well.
right.
So I think, yeah, it's a special challenge for a therapist to put their own feelings aside in certain contexts, and but part of that is just to respond to that person as a person. And you, in your head, you might be thinking, well, you're out of your mind, but no, not really.
Right.
But your thinking is flawed, but you're there to assist that person in their own path towards discovery and problem solving. So yeah, definitely a challenge.
Also, you said therapy isn't political or isn't supposed to be political, but access to therapy definitely is.
Hmm.
Right, for sure.
Good point. Yeah.
Well, and we have plenty of therapists in the US, social workers and therapists, who have started to promote their practice based on identity, like Christian therapists
Hmm.
and feminist
Yeah.
therapists, which is indeed a very political approach to promoting your practice, I find. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's not supposed to be. But
Right.
yeah, as the
I think I would appreciate that. Like as a Jew, it's like, okay, you're not for me. So
Right.
thank you for
Right.
letting me know up front.
yeah, it's interesting. Maybe it is good. I don't know. But the whole identity politics theme, um, actually, the whole dynamic of divisiveness that we're experiencing right now, we're not the only country where this is happening. Um, I wish we got more writing about that, because we're
Hmm.
losing track of the commonality because politicians and institutions are promoting those divisions. I walk several days a week with someone who's on the opposite end of the political spectrum for me, and it is maybe a little challenging for both of us, but we've become friends, and it's because we've put aside the political differences, uh,
Hmm.
and focused more on what do we have in common, and just daily living kind of stuff. But it's it's easy in resistance writing to highlight those divisions as a tactic in creative writing. Conflict to create, story's not a story if there's not some sort of conflict, right?
Right.
So I understand that, but I would love to see more writing about getting beyond the divisions,
Hmm.
making that connection, broadening our communities so that we are less divided.
But even your ability to be friends with that lady is a sign of privilege, right? Because I mean, I wouldn't want to be friends with someone who thought that because I'm a Mexican Jew I'm like less than or dirty. Someone recently said dirty Mexican to me. And I was like, oh, I am not the person you want to say that to. But so even that's like a sign of privilege that you can do that because she looks at you as a full person. She's not looking at you as less than.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she might be, but
Yeah.
Another example, though, I met with our local book banner at the high school. You know, one diehard warrior against porno. And we spent a couple hours chatting with each other, and we will never be friends. We were both middle class, white, privileged women. She doesn't know anything about my sexuality, but I probably looked like the average middle class white gal to her. But, you know, I was about to say she, and it's probably neither of us were able to get over that division of, you know, are we banning books or not banning books? So it certainly varies. But indeed, as you said, Sarah, it is challenging to get beyond our differences to find the common ground when there is so much bias against those differences. In my field of study, our greatest hope is that students walk through our courses and at the end of the semester are more appreciative of the joys of the differences, rather than feeling reinforced that, quote, dirty Mexicans are just that. The kinds of things we talk about in classes. And, you know, it's a little easier to still do that at the university level, but all of the backlash in our country is eliminating some of those opportunities for that, making that connection, because they're limiting what's being taught in the classroom and what materials you can use. But students, you know, people learn bias. We are not born biased.
Right.
And it's the role of you know, education and the arts and anything else you can throw in there. It's a responsibility to unteach that bias, as far as I'm concerned. Just as it's the role of Writers Resist as a resistance publication to try to unteach those biases that are so dominant in our country and around the globe.
We have a comment by Shreya. She says, continuing Sai's thought, lately I've been thinking about resistance and tolerance as working against each other. Sometimes when I'm fighting oppression, I wonder if I'm being too intolerant and angry when I should be empathetic and understand how various people's traumas shape their problematic behaviors. This affects my writing process because it makes me feel bad or guilty for raging. I have been no saint myself. So how do you suggest one can find a balance between tolerance or empathy and fight back or resistance?
Wow, what a great question.
Yeah, that sounds like a therapist question.
No.
No, it's a really honest question. Thank you for posing that.
Yeah.
I think that, wow, I think
it's such a good question. None of us want to answer it.
But it's such an intimate question, because how do you draw any balance with these internal things that we're experiencing?
I have a really hard time with it.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling one of my classes the other night that I'm angry all the time. We were talking about what is a feminist and, you know, the stereotype and, oh, angry man hater. And I said, well, you know, I don't hate men, but I am enraged all the time, and I should be. But as I experience and express my rage, I also feel empathy. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think maybe that's my response to your question is they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. But there are probably times when I am raging to the point that I would have trouble being empathetic. But I'm working on that, and I have a few years left to resolve that. So, but yeah, it's a balance that we each, I think, have to find in our own way. But I regularly experience both, if we can call them emotions, concurrently. It's just, I think it's human to be challenged by that, but also human to accept it, that we feel both things
And want to do better.
and want to do better.
Want to do better. Yeah. I write prose and mostly fiction, but then occasionally something will go really crazy and I'll have to write an essay, a personal essay. And I have two people that I send those to. One is KB, and then the other one is my best friend, Kelly. And KB is like really good with the grammar and like the logic. And she'll be like, oh, if people don't know you, they won't know what you're talking about. So clean that up. And then Kelly is in charge of going, you sound like a really angry bitch. Do you want to sound like that? And I'm like, usually I'm like, yeah, I do, Kelly. I do want to sound like that. But sometimes I have to stop and I think, no, I need to be more present. I'm sorry. I just hit my dog. I have to be more present to what the other people are going through also. Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge for me now. She's mad because I hit her with my chair and she's throwing a temper tantrum. So, okay, I forgot what I was talking about. Sorry.
We can't hear her. You don't need to apologize.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to recognize our own ability to be intolerant and to be polarizing. I mean, there's time, I swore I wasn't going to swear at the TV anymore when Trump was on. I mean, but I failed at that. And I try to stay honest with myself when I'm thinking in broad-based terms that ignore the humanity of the person in front of me or the complexity of the person in front of me, whether I'm reading about them or talking with them or whatever. And I'm not talking about a therapeutic situation. So I think it's learning how to find a balance between those two things and tolerating that. But I think about one of the things I learned early on in poetry or writing political poetry that might apply a little bit is I got really good at satire and irony. But one of my first instructors pointed out to me, and it was hard to hear, is that that's a power gesture itself, being ironic. And it helps the writer maintain a safe distance from the material you're writing about. And you have to be willing to be more vulnerable and to have some skin in the game. And to the degree that we can be more vulnerable in those situations in our writing, that gives other people something to connect to.
How did it go?
That isn't just another polarizing gesture. And it's more honest. So
is that like what the comedians call punching down? You don't want to punch down, you only want to punch up.
Oh, I don't know that term so well.
Yeah. You can't make jokes about people who have less power than you.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can only punch up. You cannot punch down.
Yeah. Well, and ironically, if you're just relying on irony and satire, which I was pretty good at, you're sitting in a position of superiority, or you're placing yourself in a position of superiority. And when you do that, it's harder to be honest with yourself. It's harder to be honest with your own shortcomings or your own ability to hold bias, right? Mm-hmm. And to disregard other people on the basis of perhaps a belief or what you project as their beliefs. So,
just craft-wise, though, irony is like so fun because if you have like a really good ironic tone and you're writing and you're going along in that tone, and then all of a sudden you hit someone with like a really personal truth, then they're like, whoa, like you've actually hit them, which is what I enjoy doing in my writing, just like suddenly shocking people with the truth. So I think it's a lot of fun.
It can be very satisfying. I liked it. I liked the feeling, but it was hard for me to hear that from the instructor. And he's right. You need to have something at stake, some part of you in that, whether it's a poem or, for it to be most effective, I guess. There's a quote from Yehuda Amichai, very famous poet, from the place where we are right, flowers will never, right? So if we just consistently insist on our position or being right or being superior, flowers will never grow. We'll never find that kind of more unity.
Say the quote again, you cut out.
Yeah.
From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow.
Oh,
Interesting.
yeah, that's a little too close to home.
Yeah, I'm against it. I did want to address one thing. Is it Shreya? Is that how you pronounce your name? Or Shreya or Shreya?
Shreya, you're right, it's Shreya.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is lovely. I can really empathize with your comment about understanding various people's traumas and how that shapes their problematic behaviors. Because of what I teach, I have followed a number of the cases in India that are of sexual violence that are very the same. We have the same issue here, frankly. They might be written about differently or expressed differently, but there's a huge amount of sexual violence in the United States that goes unreported because the system is so poorly designed in terms of addressing the dynamics of sexual violence. But I did want to say, I think it's okay for you, Shreya, to not feel empathy at times.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an absolutely human and reasonable and wise response because we cannot empathize all the time. It doesn't matter what brought people to behave, to perform problematic behavior sometimes if they are so destructive.
Mm-hmm.
At least as an initial response, it's lovely of you to think about that, but sometimes it's just okay to not be empathetic.
I would agree with that, KB. Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't really owe the oppressor anything, to tell you the truth. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
If you commit violence against me, yeah, my empathy is
Right.
kind of gone.
There are extremes that are too far, bridge too far.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between understanding the cause of a destructive behavior and empathizing with the person who performs it. You can certainly understand causes, but you don't have to embrace them emotionally.
Do we have more time for questions? Do you guys, it's been an hour, so if you guys are fine with more questions, I think Sai has another question and Mary has also put a comment. So
Sarah, I'm okay. Sarah and Dave.
I'm okay for a few more minutes, sure.
all right, okay. Yes, Sai, can we make the question very quick?
Yeah. I think Sarah was addressing how KB is privileged to be friends with someone on the opposite end of the political spectrum. So, and there's this idea that it's a alarmingly popular idea that subversion is more powerful than revolution because people often bring up how we can never reach the India that we think will truly be united in its diversity. But that also is a very privileged choice to make and not a universal notion. So, do you think we must actively revolt or actively subvert because we're doing it out of the privilege of choice, not by necessity, right? Subversion. So, I'd like to hear your comments on that.
What do you think, Sarah?
I have no idea. I mean, I really don't. I think there comes a point where you just get fed up. You can only be so quiet and take, I almost said shit. You can only take shit for so long. And then you can't, it becomes too overt. And I think a lot of times that's when people react.
I think subversion can be a great thing. One of the more active and empowered right-wing groups in our country is called Moms for Liberty, and I infiltrated unintentionally, I figured that when I applied to go to their conference last summer, I assumed they'd check me out and reject my application to go, but they didn't check me out. All they would have had to do is Google my name, and they would have seen that I was not a compatriot. But
that was when you were using your privilege for a good thing, although it scared me. It did scare me.
But being there, I mean, it was quite disturbing. I reported everything. All of the Republican presidential candidates spoke. All of the breakout sessions that I attended were really fear and consequently hate based. But being able to, and I wouldn't say it was active subversion, but being able to be there and capture directly, firsthand what they were trying to teach their people, allows me to challenge that in the classroom and, over cocktails with somebody. I talk about it a lot, and it is maybe a less overt form. I am not overturning the government, but I'm trying to enlighten people to what this group with a lovely name, Moms for Liberty, that's so American, right? But they are quite hateful. They're quite biased, quite fearful. And some of our submissions have addressed them, or groups like them. So I think the ability to connect with the opposition, the oppressive opposition, and learn enough to then be able to teach people about why it's unhealthy for our country, whether it's through writing or a lecture in the classroom or a classroom discussion or whatever. I think that is a form of subversion, and I think it's a really valuable one. Actual overturning, a system or a government, obviously that happens at times. And we have factions in the United States at the state level that are trying to break away, trying to secede. There's a part of Oregon that wants to no longer be part of Oregon. There are a number of states like that. They aren't organized in anywhere where they're actually subverting government rule. But again, I think there's a spectrum of subversive acts, and I'm all for some of them.
How utopian.
I didn't know that she was going to go to that Moms of Liberty. She just kind of like disappears occasionally and does her weird subversive acts. And so then all of a sudden she started, like, I don't know if it's Facebook or Twitter or what, but all of a sudden she was like at this place. She was talking about what was happening with Moms of Liberty, and I was like, did I get my wires crossed? What is that? And then I started texting her. I was like, oh my God, are you safe there? Those women scare me too. They just seem so out there.
Yeah, they were so normal.
That's even scarier. That's why it was more disturbing.
It was a bunch of privileged middle-class white women who had mostly homemakers, stay-at-home moms, who were empowered by this group to step out of the personal space of the home and become active in public. And most of the ones I talked to had never done that before. So in ways, it is enlightening for them. They are being empowered by this group to perform their own kind of subversive acts. They're trained to go disrupt public school board meetings. They're trained to communicate in certain ways with elected officials, et cetera, et cetera. So for them, these were people who, the ones I talked to, there were way more people there than I was able to talk to, but for them, it was a revelation that they had some agency, some personal power that they could exercise outside of the home. And that was the impetus of the women's movement in the United States. But obviously from a different perspective now.
But aren't these like the same women that are like women's places in the home and we shouldn't be educated and all of that? Why do we even need the vote? You know, like trad wives.
Yeah, these are not trad wives. No,
Okay.
they're all
So it's
about.
not the case where it's come like full circle.
Yeah, have you all heard about trad wives in India for now?
Uh, I'm not sure what that means. Is that are you talking?
Yeah, it's a social movement, a fairly small one, I think, but they some of them are pretty significant influencers on social media, and they practice the traditional role of wifery. They
Mm-hmm.
get married, they make lots of
Yes.
babies, they make their own bread, they sew their own clothes, they grow their own veggies. It's a reversion to the settler days of the
Hmm.
United States in terms
But
of.
it's also role playing
It is.
because in order to maintain that lifestyle, they actually have all these people behind the scenes who are taking care of their children or actually cooking the meals or running the farms, or some of them are just incredibly wealthy, like the one ballerina who's got the 8 children and the $35,000 stove that she's doing all of her traditional cooking on. And so it's like it's role playing what they think
Hmm.
the 1950s or 1800 pioneer days were like. And
No, it's fiction.
it's fiction.
Fiction.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
definitely fiction.
yeah, for the bigger influencers, it is. Sarah's absolutely right. There've been exposés on some of them, and they're followed around by a production crew.
Mm-hmm.
Like bad reality TV. Reality TV.
Right. Yeah.
What the challenge for me with that is it diminishes the validity of the role of being a full-time parent and
Right.
housekeeper, which is a
Mhm.
legitimate role for a lot of people. Now, increasingly men, but it has been a very satisfying role for a lot of women in the United States, and there's no reason to belittle it if that's the choice they make and they have the privilege of not having to have a two income household.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is entertainment. It's not fact. It isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not
We
sure
need.
if a similar current exists in India, but if someone from like uh, the meeting knows any such current, please to say. But I think this mythological space, reverting to this mythological fictional space, I think this does exist in India in various ways, especially the very right wing Hindutva politics that exists in India. That imagines sort of an undivided India, which is basically the entire subcontinent, includes Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and all these. So want to, they believe that this is the original land um, that we should strive for. So that is the current political conflict
Mm.
in India. It has been for a while since the current government uh, took hold to power, but even before that, I think it had been building for a while. So yeah, that does exist, but in other relations too, I think feminist movements. I'm not sure if something like trad wives exists in India. So uh, yes, I think we have to close soon. I don't want to keep you guys here forever. Do you have a question or you have like a short comment side?
I have a short comment, but
Okay.
if there's no time left, I'd
Yeah,
be okay to withdraw.
we're
Yeah.
okay. Let's hear the comment.
No, there's not trad wives in the sense that they're a strong uh, political movement or they have a strong influential presence on social media. But in an interesting parallel is that it's almost always the wealthier upper caste or upper class women who engage in projecting themselves as these trad wives. But
Hmm.
like someone rightly pointed out, it's usually a whole ensemble of maids and other house help who do most of the heavy
Hmm.
lifting, but
Mm-hmm.
then they act as these harbingers of like good, respectable, traditional values, when in reality it's largely showboating. And yeah,
That's because the actual traditional wives who are running a household, raising the children, taking care of the like farm, which is what I live on. We're too busy. We're too busy to put it all on social media
Yeah.
and oh, look at me in
Right.
my dress while I'm baking bread. They're
and
they're actually they're actually living their lives. They don't have time for that.
for sure, it's almost always performative, right? Like
Yes.
Mhm. Yes.
it's performative because the actual I mean, the authentic values of the supposed trad wife are miserable. There's a reason why people were not happy with that. They had to move away from it. So
Well,
that's
and it's highly commercial with the trad wives. They're making money off of that.
Hmm.
I tend to agree. I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think that is it. I don't see any more questions, and it's been well over an hour, so I think we can close this. Thank you so much for coming on this panel. It was extremely insightful, and I think all of us did a lot of thinking about writing, resistant writing, especially at a time like this when, like I mentioned, with Akhand Bharat, the history is being rewritten in India, increasingly in public university or public school textbooks. We have not even public school, even private school textbooks. History is being distorted, and we are consistently reverting to that mythological space that never existed. And so, in a space like in a time like that, to engage in resistant writing, and more importantly, to create a space for resistant writing to sort of congregate and rage, like Sarah mentioned, like a ball of like a supernova. I think that requires a lot of effort. That requires an incredible amount of grit and time and patience, and because there's so much grief that you have to deal with when you're reading submissions, and I think that is very inspiring for us and for me personally, to continue writing, to continue envisioning such spaces. While Sultan's Creative Writing Club has a journal and it's not specifically oriented towards resistant writing, we do believe that the personal is political or the personal is universal. So I think uh, all of the writing that emerges in the club is in some way um, resisting the existing hierarchies, the existing structures of violence, and it's like, yeah, like Mary pointed out, um, like a small group of rats just trying to find places to gnaw at. Um,
Yeah.
so um, yeah, thank you so much for. I think I would like to just mention another quote by Bell Hooks. She said, not sure where it is, but she said something along the lines of how we don't write because we don't have a choice. We always have a choice, but we write because it's a way for us to, especially people from the margins, it's a way for us to um, it's the language for us to hold on to life, right? Provides the language for us to hold on to life, and there is so much life in the works of Writers Resist, and I personally deeply enjoy the work that comes out, and I could tell the effort that goes in. um, I would suggest everyone to check out the many issues they have, over 100 of issues, um, and to also submit
Yes.
to spaces. There's a lot to rage about in this country, and I think the more we talk about it, the um the weaker the foundations of these violent institutions get. So thank you so much. Also, please check out the works that KB, Debbie, and Sarah have. They are in the links that I provide. I think a lot of people joined later, so I'll just send the link again. Um,
That's so kind of you.
Yes.
yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
Um, we're honored to have been included, and it was fun.
It was
Was.
fun.
Thanks for all your questions.
Yeah,
Very
it was
good
nice
ones.
meeting all of you.
Thank you so
Take care.
much. Yeah, if you don't have any closing comments, I think we can call it a night, and a very good morning to you. I think it's morning for all of you, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. all.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.